Hi everyone, my name is Kristina Virro. I'm a registered psychotherapist, and we're going to be talking about how to stay connected as a couple when you are going through fertility treatments and infertility in general. So a little bit about me, I own a business called Fresh Insight, which is a mental health and wellness clinic located in Markham, right by Woodbine and 16th. We also provide virtual sessions as well. Like I said, I'm a registered psychotherapist. I always say that psychotherapy, in case you're not familiar with that term, it's basically like having a personal trainer for your brain and mental health. So if you are somebody who is just feeling a little stuck in life, if you have any symptoms of anxiety, depression, any other mental illness, working with a therapist is about gaining some awareness about your experience and also some practical tools and strategies about how to navigate that. And I also am a content creator, kind of by accident. I made a video about mental health several years ago that went completely viral. And ever since then, I have been making content. I have a lot of followers on TikTok, Instagram. I've also been asked to give my expertise for different media outlets. So you can follow me there. I'm at Therapy Kristina on TikTok, and I'm also at Kristina Virro on Instagram if you want to see my little mental health tidbits there. So an agenda for today, we're going to be highlighting the specific ways that infertility affects couples, the differences in coping between female and male identifying individuals, helpful communication techniques, so that by the end of this session, you will have a deeper understanding of the impact of infertility, but also tools to enhance your connection with one another. So to talk about context, why do couples have issues when they are going through infertility? And obviously, I know many of us know this intuitively, but I mean, the reality is that difficulties becoming pregnant are seldom part of an individual or a couple's vision when they are wanting to start a family. There's a lot of narratives out there about how easy it is to get pregnant. When you're in health class in high school, it's all about how to not get pregnant. Make sure you wrap it up, make sure you take contraception, make sure you do all the things, make sure you're abstinent. There are very few conversations in the world as you are growing up about not being able to become pregnant. And so navigating this world means a few things that are kind of not part of the plan that we had. So sometimes these treatments can take months, they can take years. That can mean delays to starting a family, which results in this sense of pressure and urgency. And that can show up in a number of ways. That can be just being anxious. That can be putting pressure on each other. Oftentimes, this also means feeling behind from friends, which can contribute to that feeling of urgency as well. There's also a huge financial investment that I feel like many of us don't really feel like we have a space to talk about. Whereas if somebody can get pregnant naturally, they've saved a ton of money, which is not part of the picture when you are a couple who is going through a lot of treatments. And obviously, there are way more highs and lows, emotionally speaking, when you're going through fertility together. Like I mentioned, anxiety, shame is another one I see, feeling like you are a failure in some capacity. And the physical highs and lows, which can completely magnify the emotional ones. So there's hormonal fluctuations, there's injections that are going on, there's appointments that have to be attended, and this can be really, really hard physically as well. So according to the research on the impact of infertility on couples, there's obviously these psychological and sexual impacts. A lot of couples will describe sex as feeling like a chore, as a task that needed to be completed. We've just briefly touched on some of the psychological toll of shame, anxiety, urgency. Research also tells us that mutual support and consideration between partners can really help us cope better with this, though. And we're going to talk about that more today. A husband's support seems to have a particularly protective impact on a woman's negative thoughts. So in other words, the more supportive that a husband is, the less negativity that a woman thinks throughout this process. And on the flip side, women who were not satisfied with their husband's support have higher levels of anxiety. And I always kind of say that when we are in a relationship, we are creating an ecosystem together. And so a woman's anxiety doesn't just impact her, it affects kind of the ecosystem, the vibe of the house, the amount of emotional connection that is felt between both partners, the amount of quality time that's spent together potentially. So I see that as actually being a couple issue as well in certain ways. But let's talk about more of these gender differences in infertility. So infertility is often seen as something that is a woman's problem, and that can be societally, but it can also be just on an individual level. It can also be on a cultural level. I know there's some women I've worked with from different cultures who kind of have had that idea ascribed to them of being pregnant is a woman's responsibility and a woman's job. That, as a result, when it's not going well, can increase those feelings of shame. So what is shame? I just want to pause here really quickly. Shame is when we take a hardship that we experience and we make it a character flaw within us. So it loses specificity to the particular situation. It loses being a temporary external problem. It goes from this infertility stuff is really hard to this infertility stuff shows that I am a failure in some way or I am defective. That would be shame. Women are also acutely aware of every single fluctuation in their own physical body when they're trying to conceive, and that can add to a ton of anxiety. I've worked with a lot of women who will say, oh, I felt a little bloated one day. Does that mean that I'm pregnant? Does that mean that I miscarried? Does that mean that something's gone wrong? Does that mean that something's gone right? And through no fault of men's own, they just do not have access to that level of information and input going through their brains and bodies all the time. Women also, as a result of that, carry the physical burden of the treatments. So having these hormonal fluctuations that make them feel sore, bloated, more emotional than usual, out of control of their emotions, that's not something that's shared by men, obviously. And they tend to cope by avoiding social situations that might be emotionally stressful. So avoidance is a big one in the form of I might not go to a baby shower, I might not go to a mall because there's a chance of walking by a baby store. So that's a go-to coping strategy for a lot of women. Now, the experience for men, and I do want to talk about this because as we were sharing before, because infertility can sometimes be viewed as a woman's issue, a woman's problem, a woman's responsibility. I think that there's issues with that for women, and that can lead to men just not being included in these conversations at all. So the grief with men is often internalized. They keep it to themselves, partly in an effort to protect their partners from more emotional pain. And I think that that is a myth that men carry is the less that I share, the more helpful it is. When a lot of women I know, whether we're talking about infertility or not, say that I actually would really love if he shared more. But that is the tendency, is to keep things to themselves. And that, as a result, leads to a lot of isolation and feeling invisible throughout the process. Some men have also reported feeling less like a man because there are some associations between sexual vitality, being most manly, being able to get a woman pregnant, being associated with manliness, right? So there have been comments like that, and again, feeling excluded throughout the process. Like I just mentioned, conflation of fertility with virility and sexual potency, which can lead to feelings of personal inadequacy as well. So if you are watching this as an individual or as a couple, I just want you to check in with what you feel about the content so far. And maybe you can pause if you're with your partner and just sort of ask, does that resonate? Are there any ways that you do feel inadequate? Are there any ways that you feel isolated? And you don't even really need to do anything with that information, but I think sometimes the point of these types of presentations is to facilitate more conversation between couples about their inner feelings and their inner worlds. So feel free to pause me at any point, check in with yourself and check in with your partner. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, so on the bright side, here's a quote. If couples learn to support each other, this experience will bring them closer together and strengthen the marital relationship. It has been confirmed that infertile women have reported better marital functioning than have the fertile controls. A couple's ability to talk about their fertility problems and their plans for the future can lead to strengthened feelings of commitment and loyalty and a closer relationship with greater emotional intimacy. And I have 100% found this to be true. There are two sides to the coin of infertility stuff. One is that it magnifies some problems that were already there before fertility issues came up. But I don't think that's a bad thing. It gives us the opportunity to really address those issues head on, to figure out how we can create a relationship that feels more fulfilling for both people and really, really thrive. And I've seen so many people really thrive as a couple when they're going through fertility stuff because they have that opportunity. It might feel really tough at the time, but there is opportunity within it. And this is a quote from a journal article, Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy. So the question is, how do we show support and communicate in a healthy way? Because as I was sharing before, when we talked about the findings about this, a lot of it was about if a partner can support the other in the right way, then that leads to positive outcomes. So I want to talk about the Gottman study. So the Gottmans are a couple that are really, really well known in the world of marital therapy, couples therapy, relationship issues. So John Gottman in 1986, he and his colleagues built this apartment-style lab at the University of Washington that was dubbed the Love Lab by the media at the time. And they studied how couples interacted. I think their work was, 85 couples were recruited, but since then they've studied so many more couples. And they hooked these people up to electrodes. They asked them a series of questions. They measured their blood flow, heart rates, how much sweat they produced, and they really dove into this. So questions that they asked were, what's a positive memory that you have? How did you meet? What's a conflict that you're facing? And they measured all of these things when the partner was talking about it in real time together. And after they followed up with these couples, they found that they could predict if and when a couple would split up with over 90% accuracy based on their findings. So they know a lot about what works and what doesn't. They called the two groups the relationship masters and the relationship disasters. And we can learn a lot from the relationship disasters and both of them. So what not to do. So they came up with this idea that they called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse from their research. And these were the 4 things that came into play with communicating that had some of the biggest predictors of divorce. So if a couple had these 4 horsemen, they were way more likely to break up. So the 4 horsemen were criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Criticism is verbally attacking another person's character or personality. You always talk about yourself. Why are you so selfish? That's critical. That's being critical. Contempt is making statements from a position of moral superiority with the intention to insult or hurt. Eye-rolling, mocking, having hostile humor, just having this general attitude that you're better than the other person or that they're just a horrible human being that isn't worth your time. Defensiveness is victimizing yourself to ward off a perceived attack and reverse blame. So you think I'm lazy? Well, what about you? You never do the dishes when I ask. That's defensiveness. And then stonewalling is withdrawing to avoid conflict, to convey disapproval, distance, and separation. It actually, on the outside, can look like somebody is ignoring you and that they're being very cold. But what the Gottmans found was that it actually was typically associated with very high physiological arousal, which means that they were very distressed, actually. So it might have been coming across as like, I'm just ignoring you and I don't care, but they were very emotionally dysregulated and physiologically dysregulated. And 85% of stonewallers are men, which is interesting, which I think also comes back to this idea of men kind of retreating inwardly. So healthy communication. We now know what to do. What are the things that maybe we do want to do? So there is a style of communication called nonviolent communication. It was developed by a psychologist named Marshall Rosenberg in the 70s, and he actually taught this style of communication to inner city schools, to tribes that were not communicating well. He went all over the world to teach this. His book is by the same name. It's a great read. And his goal was to help people learn communication that helps us create quality connections that inspire compassionate giving and receiving, and about noticing what emotions are alive in us, to gain awareness about what our needs are in different situations and what our partners are. So he came up with some different questions and ideas that we're going to go through. But a big thing I've taken from nonviolent communication is to look at things through this lens. We can ask ourselves, what is my need right now? What is my partner's need right now? And how can we communicate and act in ways that support both of our needs right now? So what are our needs as a couple? And I find this helpful when I'm going into things. What is my need? What is their need? And what are both of our needs? But he actually came up with a script of how to put this into practice. And I love it because it's extremely practical. So the first thing is to share our observations. Then we share feelings, needs, and requests. So I want to go through these one by one because they are not as simple as they may seem. So observations is about sharing concrete, objective facts as if you were a fly on the wall. So if I were a fly on the wall, what would I see? And this is helpful because it removes the judgment. So rather than saying, do say, I've noticed that we haven't gone on a date in 4 weeks. That is objective, concrete, and observable thing. Versus, you never make time for me. That's just a very judgmental thing to say that will probably trigger the defensiveness, as we talked about from those 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Communicating your feelings is about the emotion that you observe in yourself, and it has to take the stem of I feel emotion, not I feel like. Because whenever we say I feel like, it's actually communicating a judgment in disguise. I feel like you're an asshole is a judgment. I feel hurt is a feeling. So that's sneaky because a lot of people say, well, it was an I feel statement. Well, was it an I feel statement? So I feel isolated versus I feel like you're being selfish right now. I feel like is a judgment on the way. Needs are, rather than trying to rely on another person, we just appreciate that we have needs in their own right, regardless of external circumstances. So for example, I have a need for connection. That just might be a need that you have as a human being that you've realized is very important to you versus I need you to stop working so much. That is actually more of a request. So a request is a concrete, specific action that we ask of somebody in order to enrich our lives. There's different types of requests. You can have a feedback request, for example, of could you let me know how this is sounding as I bring this up to you? But sometimes they are just more concrete things. I really like the language of would you be willing to when you are framing a request, because it is an offering, not a demand, and that can also reduce defensiveness. Or what do you think we could do? That has a really nice team dynamic to it. So an example is, I would love it if we could have one night a week where you're home early. That's more concrete. So putting it all together, here's what not to do. You're working way too much these days and obviously don't care about me. I feel like you're being really selfish and I need you to stop working so much. A lot of judgments with that. Going to trigger defensiveness. I feel like is a judgment and I need you to stop working so much. It is a request, but that's not how we want to voice our needs. You know, that a request sounds very demanding. Versus, I've noticed that you've been working until 8 p.m. most weeknights rather than working until 5 p.m. as you usually do. I feel isolated these days and have a need for connection. Would you be willing to have a conversation about how we can feel more connected right now? So I want you to just pay attention, even just how you feel in your own body as you read these back or as you hear them back. Maybe the first one, like even as I read it, I'm like, oh, woof, that would have been really hard to hear. Versus the second one, I feel very open when I read that out loud. I can't imagine feeling accused, right? And it's much more collaborative. Okay, so that's an example of nonviolent communication. So I want you to turn to your partner and ask, what are you doing well already to keep your disagreements healthy? What can you give yourselves a pat on the back for? Maybe you're good at inserting a little bit of humor in a way that helps break the tension. Maybe you're really good at repairing afterwards. Just something to think about, okay? Now, the next thing I want to talk about is validation, because if there's something that I think a lot of us are missing as a skill, it's how to validate someone. So what is validation? It is just the recognition and acceptance of another person's internal experience being valid, and it helps them feel heard and understood rather than judged. So ways to validate. One is a nonverbal thing, which is to just be fully present with somebody. So you're not on your phone, you're not scrolling through what to watch on Netflix. They're talking to you and you are just present. You are giving lots of nonverbal cues that you're listening, like head nods, eye contact, those types of things. That in and of itself can cause somebody to feel like their experience is valid and that you recognize them. The second way you can validate somebody is to verbalize or reflect what you've heard. So for example, I hear you saying that you're frustrated that things aren't going as quickly as you hoped they would. When somebody says that back, it's like, wow, I feel really seen, I feel really understood, and I feel like somebody's recognizing my feelings. You can also read your partner's behavior and guess what they might be feeling. So this can help you develop emotional intelligence, and it's also a way of supporting people who might not be as articulate about their emotions. They might not have as much awareness. So for example, if I'm working with men, I might do this a bit more if they're not as prone to reading their emotional experience due to that propensity to internalize things. So for example, I'm guessing that the comment your friend made about becoming pregnant was really hard to hear. So that also helps fill in the blank of your partner's experience. 4, you can normalize their feelings. I totally understand why you're struggling right now, and I imagine so many people in your shoes would feel the same way. What validation is not? You'll be fine. It's not that big a deal. There's no need to get yourself worked up about it. You're blowing this out of proportion. I don't think there's ever a time I've heard any of these and felt comforted or validated. Things aren't so bad. So a reminder that I want to share is that when we're talking about problem solving, this doesn't mean that when we're talking about validation, this doesn't mean that problem solving is off the table, but it just means that I think it's more effective when problem solving comes after validation. And I'll share how this, I came to realize this as a therapist. If somebody comes into my office and they're saying, oh, I'm so mad at Tracy, she said something mean the other day. If I immediately go into being like, well, here's how you can be more assertive with Tracy, they're really not going to feel very supported by me or very heard because I haven't listened. I haven't gotten to know their experience. I haven't validated any part of their experience. And so it's not, therapy won't feel good. Whereas if I sort of say, okay, well, let's talk about that. Oh, wow, I can imagine that would be hard. Your best friend said this and that must have been really difficult. It sort of softens the hard edges around the experience, softens the emotions around it so that when I do want to suggest something, the other person is more receptive. And I think that works the exact same in relationships. When I've gone to my partner and I've said something and the first thing that he says is, well, have you tried this? It ain't going to land well. I'm just like, oh, there you go. Problem solving again. I don't like it. Versus if he's like, oh, tell me more. Well, now we are good. We are connecting. We are vibing. So that is just something to keep in mind. You can problem solve, but you gotta, warm the oven first. So why does this matter? So like we were saying, couples with fertility issues come out stronger in the end when they feel as though their partner has been supportive of them throughout their journey. So we need to make sure we're offering that right kind of support. Other tips for supporting, what can I do to help you feel supported right now, is a great question to ask. Would it be helpful if I really like this one for men because I will say sometimes women get very tired of asking and tired of thinking of the thing you could do. So, it's okay to ask, what could I do to help you feel supported? But every now and again, more often than not, it's nice to say, would it be helpful if I made you a cup of tea? Would it be helpful if I went to the grocery store? Would it be helpful if I did the laundry tonight? Like, think about it first for yourself rather than always relying on your wife, girlfriend, whoever, to always think of that as well. Sometimes what you can do that's a helpful exercise is to also make a list of things that the other person likes when it comes to feeling supported, just to take out any of the guesswork. So one of you make a list of, here are 5 things I really love. They really make me feel supported. When you give me a back rub, I feel very supported. Okay, I'm going to make my list. When you bring me a tea from Tim Hortons, I feel very supported. It just makes me feel like you were thinking about me. So then you have a cheat sheet to turn to. If you don't know what to do and you're feeling hopeless about how to support your partner, just turn to your cheat sheet. And when in doubt, hug it out. If you don't know what to say, sometimes just giving your partner a hug and rubbing their back feels really deeply supportive, and just like a very kind-hearted gesture. And you just hold each other for a little bit, and sometimes that helps the wave of emotions come through in a way where you actually just felt quite like a team. Here are some findings from a study that showed that when male partners supported their partner in the following ways during treatments, it was actually very helpful. So one was helping with the housework. So like I said, cleaning the house, doing the groceries, making some meals to put in the freezer, meal prepping, cleaning the bathrooms, making the bed, cleaning the sheets, booking an appointment for, if you do have a child and this is secondary infertility, booking an appointment for your other kid, whatever. Emotional sharing and encouragement. So like we were talking about at the beginning, I think there's a myth among men that it's actually more helpful to keep things to yourself versus sharing. And a lot of women really do like that. Checking in on whether she's taking her medications regularly. And also providing maximum comfort in transit to and from appointments can be really, really helpful for women. So there's some specific things if you're not really sure what to do. Avoiding toxic positivity for both partners. So toxic positivity is when you're always trying to be positive. And I think we all have the best of intentions when we do that, but often how it can land is as being invalidating. So listening and validating your partner's grief, sharing your own pain, reminding each other that you'll get through it no matter the outcome and no matter what. And then also seeking professional support, right? This is a very difficult situation. It's a first time, hopefully for both of you. It's going to be a clunky ride at first, but having a safe space to share your feelings in a way where there's somebody moderating the conversation, providing some tips on how to communicate can just be so helpful. So we do offer couples therapy at Fresh Insight. We also have therapists who have personally experienced infertility, which helps save you from having to explain some of the technical scientific stuff, which is always a bonus. Tips for receiving support. Make sure you set realistic expectations of your partner. So it is natural and normal to not always know how to support one another. It's normal to sometimes have days where you're just really upset and it's hard for anybody to get through to you. Don't expect your partner to be your therapist who has all the answers or who has all of the capacity to hold space for your pain. So be realistic in your expectations. Also try to not take all of your emotions out on them. I think a lot of us have very high expectations of our partners these days in our relationships, but make sure you're relying on your other support system as well. And there's an expression in couples therapy where we say the problem is the problem, the person is not the problem. And what that means is that when you're going through something difficult, it's really easy to go to a place of blame and trying to find flaws in your partner. But I like to say to people, instead of saying, oh, I'm just so mad at you or whatever, it's like, I'm really mad at this situation. I'm really mad at the infertility right now. Entering conversations with an open mind rather than agenda or expectation. So sometimes we will go into conversations of saying, I'm going to say this, and then I want him to say that, and then I want him to give me a hug. And that can really steal some of our joy from those moments or just set people up for failure. So just entering conversations with an open mind and remembering that everyone grieves differently. As I said before, the rally the troops line here is about making sure that you're relying on other people in your support network, therapists, friends, family, pets, yoga classes, exercise classes, whatever. Rely on other people and things in your support network rather than just your partner. So if you're with your partner, I would invite you to turn to them and just have a discussion about what they do right and how they've already been helping you get through some tough times. Let's just have a little moment of gratitude for one another if you can. Okay, so I know there's so much more to talk about with this, but if you do want to stay in touch, you can contact our clinic at hello@fresh-insight.ca, follow me on Instagram and TikTok, or you can subscribe to our blog on Fresh Insight. We do share tips on there about mental health, nutrition, lots of things related to wellness. And just know that you do not have to go through this alone, okay? This is a taxing time, but it's also, like I said, an opportunity to really enhance all of the good things that are already there and just to make some tiny tweaks to the things that need some improvement as well. So thank you for your time. Best of luck to you in your journey for whoever is watching, and have a great day.